Chapter 7. A surprise was waiting for Dad when he came out to the camp the next evening. He found the cooking fire all mixed up with a rustic crane, just like the real campers used in the Northwoods. Jud had seen a picture of one in a book, and with Andy's help, had made one just like it. The boys had worked hard to have it all done when Dad arrived. They scouted around until they found 2 green poles with a branch at the top that made a fork or crotch. These they cut 3 feet long. Andy started to chop off all the branches close to the pole when Jud objected. "Don't cut them off like that. You want to leave the branches sticking out 3 or 4 inches. They make good hooks to hang pots on. The more hooks on the poles, the better." Jud drove 2 poles in the ground, one at each side of the fire, and laid a cross pole between them. He called the cross pole a lug pole. "Now we've got to make some gibs," said Jud. "Gibs? What are they?" asked Andy. "They're pot hooks to you. We campers call them gibs," boasted Jud in fun. They chopped some short sticks, each with a branch on it, to form the hook, and at the other end they cut a notch. These they took over the lug pole and the lug pots and kettles on them. Some of the pot hooks had 2 notches at the bottom, so the kettle could be raised or lowered over the fire. They had just finished the last pot hook when Dad came walking up. "Now isn't that something?" he said as he looked over the rustic crane with the gibs hanging on the lug pole. "Old Daniel Boone himself couldn't have made a better one. Those branches you left sticking out from the end poles are just the thing to hang pots on. The tenderfeet always cut them off, but the old-timers leave 'em on." Dad showed the boys how to make a crane when there were no fork sticks handy, by splitting the ends of the poles. "Of course, it's easier and better to use fork sticks like you did, but sometimes we can't find them," he explained. "Do you know how to make a wigwam stick?" Dad asked. Jud was all ears and eyes as Dad started to work. Before he stopped, he had made 6 different types of wigwam sticks. "Our crane is better than those walking sticks," said Andy. "You can only have 1 kettle on a walking stick." "Wigwam sticks, not walking sticks," laughed Dad. "Yes, you're right. A wigwam stick is handy, though, when you are in a hurry, because it doesn't take so much time to make." "They've got the dumbest names for this camping stuff," said Andy. "Why do they call them wigwam sticks?" "That comes from the Indian name," answered Dad. "You see, a wigwam stick is an Indian's way of hanging a kettle over a fire. The Indians call it chilok wigwam, but that was too much of a mouthful for the white men, so they call it a wigwam stick. But there's one thing to remember about a wigwam stick. You must always tear it down before you leave camp. Always. It means bad luck if you don't. If you forget, the night spirits will haunt you and torment you for the rest of your life. At least, so an old Indian chief told me. How it happens, I don't know, but every old-timer in the woods is dead set on tearing it down. So I tear mine down too. It must be the Indian chiefs know about such things as night spirits." Chapter 8. Jud and Andy had finished breakfast the next morning when they heard Dad coming to them from far end of the mill pond. They ran over to meet him at the road. He had a fresh supply of drinking water in a milk pail and a big wooden box in his car. He wanted them to help him carry them back to the camp. "What's the big box for?" the boys asked. "That's for a spring box," said Dad. "I brought you some fresh eggs, meat, and butter, and we've got to make a cooler so it won't spoil. A spring box in the creek will be just the thing. I'll help you fix it." Halfway back to the camp, Andy set the pail of water down and wiped his brow. "Geez, this pail's heavy. I don't see why we're carrying water anyway. Why don't we just drink out of the brook?" "The water in the brook is always cool and good." "People often get sick when they drink water out of the ponds and brooks," said Dad. "I don't see why," argued Andy. "Sometimes the pond is dirty, but the water in the brook is always clean and clear." "It looks clean, but it really isn't. You can never tell by the looks. That water is good to swim in, but not to drink. You'd have to boil it for 20 minutes and then let it cool down before you dare drink it. But that's too much bother." Jud set the pail in the brook beside a log. The top of the pail was just above the water. It had a lid on it, so there was no danger of the drinking water getting dirty. "It will keep cool now, just like that brook," said Jud, "and we can walk out on the log when we want to get a drink." Andy couldn't wait until Dad set the spring box down so he could lift the lid and see what it looked like. It was a wooden packing box about 2 feet square, or maybe a little larger. Dad had put some hinges on the top so that it could be easily lifted. There was a shelf around 3 sides on the inside, and holes drilled in through the sides near the bottom so the water could run through it when it was placed in the brook. "Now, let's see, where shall we put it?" asked Dad. "Let's walk out on the log and put it right beside the water pail," said Jud. "It's shady and cool there, and everything will be handy." When they put the box in the brook, the water ran through the holes in the side and came up almost to the shelf. They put their eggs, butter, and meat on the shelf where it was dry, and set the 2 bottles of milk right in the water at the bottom. Dad hunted up 2 rocks and put them on the top to hold the lid down tight. "We won't have to worry about anything spoiling now," said Dad. "That's just as good as an ice box or the refrigerator in Mother's kitchen."